I remember the sound first, the click of the cell door, the way the echo swallowed my name like it had never belonged to me. I was still wearing the same suit I had worn to the board meeting that morning, tailored, expensive, mine. 12 hours earlier, I was the owner of a company valued at 9 figures. 12 hours later, I was prisoner number 41729, staring at concrete walls that smelt like rust and bleach, replaying one sentence over and over in my head. Your wife has provided overwhelming evidence. That was the climax of my life, the moment everything collapsed. Not because I was guilty, but because the person who destroyed me knew exactly how much I trusted her. She didn't just send me to prison, she erased me. And the craziest part? As the cell door slammed shut, as my knees finally gave out, as I slid down that wall in a place designed to break men, she still had no idea who I really was. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my story of betrayal, and if you've ever trusted the wrong person, hit that subscribe button because you are not alone. Here is how it happened. Before I tell you how she did it, you need to understand who I was before the handcuffs. I wasn't born powerful. I wasn't born rich, at least not in the way the world measures it. I built everything people envied with sleepless nights, missed birthdays, and a belief that if I just worked harder, life would eventually soften. My company started in a one-room office with a flickering light and a borrowed desk. I answered my own calls. I cleaned my own floors. When the first contract came through, I didn't celebrate. I reinvested over and over again. Years passed. Then years flew. Suddenly, magazines wanted interviews, investors wanted dinners, strangers wanted my time. And somewhere in the middle of that rise, she appeared. Let's call her Sarah. She was calm where I was intense, warm where I was guarded. She didn't ask about my net worth. She asked about my childhood. She laughed at my worst jokes and listened like every word mattered. When I told her I didn't trust easily, she smiled and said, "Then I'll earn it slowly." That should have scared me. Instead, it felt like home. We married quietly, no headlines, no spectacle. I wanted one place in my life untouched by ambition and suspicion. I wanted a partner, not a performance. At first, she never interfered with my business. She said she admired my focus. She said she believed in my vision. When I stayed late at the office, she waited up. When I traveled, she packed my bags. People told me I was lucky, and I believed them. But success changes gravity. It pulls people closer and reveals what they're really orbiting. The first shift was subtle. She began asking questions, innocent ones. How does ownership really work? Why do you still have full control? What happens if something happens to you? I explained, I reassured, I joked. Then she started attending meetings, sitting quietly at first, taking notes just to understand. The board liked her. Investors trusted her. She was impressive. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself this is what partnership looks like. But partnership only works when both people are playing the same game. I didn't know she had already changed the rules. One night, she cried, said she felt invisible, said everything in our life had my name on it, said she wanted security. I loved her, so I compromised. I gave her access, limited access, controlled access. That decision was the first domino. What I didn't know, what I couldn't see, was that while I was protecting the company from the outside world, she was studying it from the inside. Contracts, legal structures, my habits, my weaknesses. She learned when I was exhausted. She learned when I signed without rereading. She learned who trusted me blindly. And she learned exactly how to make the truth look like a lie. The accusation came on a Tuesday. Fraud, embezzlement, abuse of authority. The documents looked real. The accounts were my name. The signatures mine. When the police showed up, Sarah stood behind them shaking, holding a statement I had never seen before. She didn't look angry. She looked relieved. In the interrogation room, they asked one question that still haunts me. Why would your wife lie? I didn't have an answer. I was reading comments on my YouTube videos the other day, and I realized I wasn't the only one. Thousands of people wrote about betrayal that didn't come from enemies, but from beds they shared, meals they cooked, lives they built together. Back then, I didn't have comments. I didn't have a voice. I didn't even have a future I could see. All I had was the sound of that cell door and the realization that the woman I loved hadn't just betrayed me, she had planned me. But here's what no one in that courtroom knew. Not the judge, not the prosecutors, not even Sarah. As I sat in that cell, stripped of my name, my company, my freedom, there was one truth buried so deep even she had missed it. A truth my father had warned me about my entire life. And if she had known it, she never would have dared to pull the trigger. Because I wasn't just a fallen businessman, I was the only son, and everything was about to change.
Prison teaches you silence first. Not the peaceful kind, the violent kind. The kind that presses against your ears until your own thoughts start screaming. The first week I barely slept. Every noise felt like a threat. Every shadow felt personal. I replayed Sarah's face in that courtroom again and again, trying to find the crack, the hesitation, the place where guilt should live. There was none. She had rehearsed this, not lines, but emotions. I learned quickly that innocence doesn't protect you in prison. It actually makes you weaker. Guilty men understand the rules. Innocent men keep expecting fairness to show up and save them. It doesn't. On day 9, a guard slid a thin envelope through the bars. My name, mispronounced, written in blue ink. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I'm doing this for both of us. You'll understand one day. Sarah. That was it. No apology, no explanation, no fear. That letter did something worse than anger me. It clarified her. She didn't think she was evil. She thought she was justified. My lawyer stopped answering my calls after the third appeal was denied. Evidence is airtight, he said the last time we spoke. Someone very close to you built this case. As if I didn't already know. Bank transfers routed through shell accounts, board votes I was recorded approving, emails sent from my address while I was on flights with no Wi-Fi. Perfectly imperfect, human enough to believe, clean enough to convict. Sarah had positioned herself as the grieving wife, the brave woman forced to expose her powerful husband. The media loved her. They called her courageous. They never asked why she smiled when the verdict was read. Prison strips time of meaning. Days blur, weeks rot. Hope becomes something you remember having, like a language you no longer speak fluently. I learned when to keep my eyes down, when to speak, when silence was safer. I traded favors I didn't want to owe just to survive. And yet, through all of it, one thing kept me breathing. My father. He hadn't come to the trial. People assumed he was ashamed of me. They were wrong. My father doesn't move emotionally. He moves strategically. And when the verdict came down, when the world decided I was finished, he made exactly one phone call. Not to a lawyer, not to a politician. To me. The prison phone crackled as his voice came through, steady, calm, almost annoyed. So, he said, she finally did it. I closed my eyes. You knew? I asked. I warned you, he replied, but knowing and accepting are different things. I wanted to scream. Instead, I whispered, she took everything. There was a pause. Not grief, calculation. No, my father said, she took what you were holding. That sentence hit harder than any punch I'd taken inside those walls. My father had built an empire before I ever built my company, but he did it invisibly. No interviews, no headlines, no public records that mattered. He believed power was safest when underestimated. When I started my business, I refused his help. I wanted my name to stand alone. He let me, because fathers sometimes let sons learn the long way. But one thing he never let go of? Ownership. "Do you remember the trust?" he asked me. The word echoed. The trust. I remembered signing documents years ago, dense legal language. I'd skimmed them, trusted him, assumed they were symbolic, a safety net for inheritance someday. "I remember," I said slowly. "Good," he replied, "because your wife doesn't." That night, for the first time since my arrest, I slept. Not because I was free, but because I finally understood something. Sarah had studied me, but she had never studied where I came from. She thought my company was the prize. She never asked who taught me how to build it. Weeks later, Sarah visited. She wore white, always white, innocence tailored to fit. She sat across from me behind thick glass, her eyes glossy, her voice soft. "I miss you," she said. I almost laughed. "You got everything you wanted," I replied. She tilted her head. "I didn't want it this way." That was the lie she told herself. She spoke about the company, her company now, about restructuring, about cleaning up my mess. She spoke like a CEO who had finally inherited order from chaos. She leaned closer to the glass. "You should have trusted me more," she whispered. I leaned in too. "I trusted you enough to ruin me," I said quietly. Her smile faltered for half a second. Half a second was all I needed. After she left, my father's second move began. Not loudly, not legally, socially. Investors started asking questions. Board members received anonymous packets, old contracts, hidden clauses, signatures that didn't match timelines. Audits were requested, not accusations, concerns. Sarah didn't panic at first. People like her never do. Panic feels like guilt. But pressure? Pressure changes posture. Inside prison, I became patient. I watched, I listened, I waited. Because here's the thing about cages. They teach you endurance, and endurance is dangerous when paired with knowledge. I wasn't fighting for freedom anymore. I was preparing for return. One afternoon, a guard called my name. Legal visit. Different room, different energy. A woman waited for me. Sharp eyes, calm hands, no sympathy in her posture. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents I had never seen before. My father's signature, dates predating my marriage, clauses that made my breath catch. "This trust," she said, "owns controlling interest in 12 holding companies." My throat tightened. "And your wife?" I asked. She met my eyes. "Your wife owns none of them." I walked back to my cell with shaking hands, not from fear, but from anticipation, because for the first time I saw the full board. Sarah thought she had won because she had my name, my company, my reputation, but she didn't have authority, and soon she wouldn't even have time. That night, as lights dimmed and the prison settled into uneasy quiet, I whispered the words that had kept me alive since my father's call. "Let her build her throne. I'll decide when it collapses." But what I didn't know yet, what no one had warned me about, was how far Sarah was willing to go once she realized the ground beneath her wasn't solid. Because when power starts slipping, desperate people don't retreat, they attack. And her next move would turn this betrayal into a war. The first sign that Sarah was losing control didn't come from a headline. It came from silence. No updates, no press statements, no carefully staged photos of her strong CEO era. When someone who feeds on attention suddenly disappears, it's not peace, it's preparation. Inside prison, rumors move faster than guards. One morning, an inmate slid onto the bench beside me during breakfast and whispered, "You're that guy, right? The businessman?"
I didn't answer. He leaned closer. My cousin works in finance, says your company's name keeps popping up in audits, weird ones. That's when I knew. My father hadn't just nudged the board, he had destabilized the ecosystem. And Sarah, she was standing at the center of it, pretending she didn't feel the floor tilt. She came again 2 weeks later. This time, she didn't wear white, she wore black. Grief cosplay. Her eyes darted around the visiting room like she was measuring exits. When she sat down, she didn't smile, she didn't cry. She stared at me like I was a mirror she didn't recognize anymore. "You did something," she said. I shrugged. "Hard to do much from in here." She clenched her jaw. "People are questioning my authority." I leaned back. "Funny how that happens when authority isn't yours." Her fingers tightened around the phone. "You think this is a game?" "No," I said calmly. "I think this is the part where you realize you never actually won." For the first time, she looked afraid, not of prison, not of law, of uncertainty. Sarah had always controlled narratives. That was her real talent. She didn't just lie, she framed reality so others would lie for her. But now the story was slipping out of her hands. Investors she had never met were suddenly requesting face-to-face meetings. Lawyers were rereading documents they had skimmed years ago. And the board, once charmed by her composure, began noticing how often she deflected instead of answered. Confidence without foundation is loud. Power without roots is fragile. The real fracture came when the forensic accountants arrived, not government ones, private, discreet, expensive, the kind you hire when you're not looking for crime, just leverage. Sarah tried to block them. That was her second mistake. Blocking scrutiny only works when you still look innocent. From my cell, I received updates in fragments, a delayed loan, a paused acquisition, a postponed expansion. Each delay was small, harmless on its own. Together, they were suffocating. I imagined Sarah pacing her glass office late at night, heels abandoned, hair undone, staring at numbers that refused to obey her. For the first time, the company wasn't responding to her commands because it wasn't hers. My father visited in person a month later. No suit, no entourage, just a man who had outlived every enemy who ever underestimated him. He sat across from me, folded his hands, and said, "She's bleeding time." I nodded. "She's trying to sell assets," he continued, "but buyers want warranties she can't give." "She's desperate," I said. "No," he corrected, "she's becoming dangerous." That word stayed with me. Dangerous. Not loud dangerous, not violent dangerous, cornered dangerous. Sarah's next move was clever. She leaked. An anonymous article surfaced online suggesting I had hidden assets offshore, that my father was involved, that the trust was a shell designed to evade justice. The timing was perfect. Public sympathy tilted, comment sections turned. People love redemption stories until they get bored, then they want monsters again. And she was offering one. Me. The prosecutors reopened inquiries. My appeals stalled. The walls felt closer again. Sarah had realized something critical. If she couldn't fully own the future, she could still poison it. If she couldn't win, she could make sure I never did. She requested another visit. This time, she didn't sit down. She stood. "You're not getting out," she said quietly. "Even if you do, you'll be nothing." I studied her face, the cracks she couldn't mask anymore. "You're afraid," I said. Her eyes flashed. "I'm in control." I shook my head. "Control doesn't need to threaten." She leaned closer, voice trembling. "If I fall, I'll take you with me." And there it was, the confession hidden inside the threat. After she left, I didn't feel victorious. I felt alert, because when someone tells you who they are, believe them. That night, my lawyer appeared again. Same sharp eyes, same calm posture.
We need to accelerate. Your wife is burning bridges. With me still on them, I replied. She nodded. Exactly. She slid a new folder across the table. Inside was one document highlighted in yellow, a clause, buried, ignored, deadly. If enacted, it removes her from all executive authority immediately. My pulse spiked. Why hasn't it been used? She replied, because it requires one condition. I swallowed. Which is? She looked at me. Proof of malicious intent. Sarah thought she was erasing me, but every threat, every leak, every reckless move, she was building the case herself. Days later, chaos erupted outside. News screens in the common area flickered with breaking updates. I caught fragments as inmates crowded around. Emergency board meeting, interim leadership, conflict of interest allegations. Sarah's name appeared, then disappeared. That scared me more than seeing it stay. My father called that night. Tomorrow, he said, everything changes. For her or for me? I asked. There was a pause. For whoever survives it. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, counting breaths, listening to distant doors slam. I entered this place as a man stripped of identity. I would leave it as something else entirely. Not innocent, not vindicated, prepared. But as dawn crept through the narrow window, a guard stopped outside my cell. He didn't open the door, he didn't speak, he just looked at me, longer than necessary. Then he said one sentence that made my blood run cold. Your wife made a call last night. I didn't know who she called, or what she promised, or what she threatened, but I knew this. Sarah wasn't done, and her final move would decide who walked free and who disappeared forever. That sentence followed me all day. Your wife made a call last night. In prison, information is currency, but partial information is a weapon. I replayed every possibility while pretending not to care. A call to a politician, a judge, a fixer, someone who could bury documents or people. Sarah didn't make emotional calls. She made strategic ones. By afternoon, the tension outside my cell was impossible to ignore. Guards whispered, schedules shifted. A unit inspection was announced without warning. Something was moving fast and not in my favor. My lawyer arrived earlier than expected. She didn't sit down. That call your wife made, she said. We know who it was to. I waited. A former federal prosecutor, she continued, now a private consultant. He specializes in containment. I frowned. Containment of what? She met my eyes. Of threats that don't disappear quietly. Sarah wasn't trying to win anymore. She was trying to end the game. Outside, the board meeting that was supposed to remove her had fractured instead. Half the members backed her, half demanded her resignation. The tie bought her time, and time was all she needed. Because while everyone argued procedure, Sarah did what she always did best. She reframed reality. A second article dropped that night. This one was worse. It implied witness tampering, suggested I had manipulated employees before my arrest, included anonymous testimonies that sounded just real enough to stick. I watched my own character get dismantled on a flickering TV screen by people who had never met me. The inmates didn't say anything. Silence can be louder than mockery. My father called at midnight. She's gone nuclear, he said. I know, I replied. She thinks fear will freeze us, he continued. It won't. But it might delay us, I said. Yes, he admitted, and delays are where accidents happen. Accidents. That word finally cracked the calm I'd been holding on to. I'm still in here, I reminded him. I'm exposed. You're protected, but not untouchable. There it was again.
danger. The next morning I was moved. No explanation, different block, different cellmate. A man with prison tattoos and eyes that measured everything twice. He nodded once when I entered, didn't ask my name, didn't need to. That night he spoke for the first time. "People with enemies don't last long in here," he said casually. I kept my voice neutral. "Good thing I don't have enemies." He smiled. "That's what they all say." 2 days later, my lawyer returned, this time visibly tense. "She's filed an emergency injunction," she said. "Claims the trust is fraudulent." "On what grounds?" I asked. "She says your father coerced you into signing, that you weren't mentally competent." I laughed once, short, sharp. "She's erasing my agency now?" I said. "She's trying to invalidate everything," my lawyer replied, "including you." That was the moment it clicked. Sarah didn't just want my company. She didn't even want my silence. She wanted my irrelevance. If she could reduce me to a broken man manipulated by others, then she didn't betray a partner. She saved a victim. The injunction stalled the clause, the one that could remove her. The clock reset, and suddenly my position, my physical position, mattered more than ever. That night, my cellmate didn't sleep. Neither did I. At 2:17 a.m., the lights flickered. At 2:19, footsteps stopped outside our cell. At 2:20, someone tried the handle. Locked. Then a whisper from the corridor. "Wrong one." My heart didn't race. It slowed, because fear, when it finally arrives, doesn't scream. It sharpens. The next morning, a guard I didn't recognize escorted me to medical. No paperwork, no explanation. That's when I knew this wasn't standard. In the hallway, my lawyer appeared, out of breath, furious. "Stop," she said to the guard. "He's not cleared for transfer." The guard hesitated. She leaned in, lowering her voice. "If anything happens to him, this facility will be on every front page by sunset." The guard stepped back. The hallway went silent. In the examination room, my lawyer shut the door. "She tried to move you," she said. "Off record, temporary relocation." "To where?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Then, somewhere quiet. That afternoon, my father did something he hadn't done in decades. He stepped into the light. Not publicly, selectively. Phone calls were returned, old alliances activated, names that hadn't been spoken in years resurfaced. The message was subtle but unmistakable. "Touch my son, and this becomes public." Sarah responded within hours. She called a press conference, crocodile tears, controlled voice, a narrative of fear. "I just want the truth," she said into a sea of microphones, "no matter how painful." The irony almost made me smile. But behind the scenes, her position was collapsing. The forensic report was finished, malicious intent documented. The clause was back on the table. All that remained was timing. My lawyer came one last time that week. "We're close," she said, "but close is dangerous." "I know," I replied. "She's cornered, which means she'll choose spectacle." "What kind?" I asked. "The kind that forces a reaction from you." That night I received another letter, handwritten, different ink, different tone. "If you testify, I'll destroy everything, not just you." No signature, didn't need one. I folded the letter carefully, not in fear, in recognition. Sarah had played her final card, and it wasn't legal. It was personal. As I lay back on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling that had become too familiar, one thought settled heavier than all the others. She wasn't trying to win anymore. She was trying to make me choose. And whichever choice I made, someone was going to lose everything.
Choice is a strange thing when you've already lost everything.
From the outside, it looks simple. Tell the truth, fight back, reclaim your name. From the inside concrete walls, inside a system that already decided who you are, choice feels more like a trap with different labels. Sarah knew that. That's why the letter worked. For 2 days, I said nothing. I didn't react. I didn't respond. I didn't ask for meetings. That silence unsettled her more than any threat ever could, because silence means calculation. My lawyer warned me, if you testify now, she'll paint it as revenge. If you wait too long, she'll control the narrative. I nodded. What I didn't tell her was this. I wasn't deciding when to speak. I was deciding how much truth the world deserved. On the 3rd night, my cellmate finally spoke again. "You're not scared," he said, not a question. "I've already been scared," I replied. "This is something else." He studied me. "People like you always think there's a clean ending." I shook my head slowly. "No, I think there's a necessary one." The board scheduled an emergency vote. Closed session, no media, no delays. Sarah would be present, so would the evidence. But one thing was missing. Me. Sarah's team pushed hard. They argued optics, they argued risk, they argued that a convicted man, even temporarily, had no place influencing corporate decisions. They weren't wrong, they were just late. My father made the call that night, not to the board, to me. "You don't need to speak. We can remove her quietly." I stared at the wall. "She'll disappear," he continued, "legally, financially, socially." I knew what he meant. "And then?" I asked. "She becomes a footnote," he replied, "and you move on." That was the ending he wanted. It wasn't the one I could live with. "She won't stop," I said, "even as a footnote." There was a long pause. "You're right," my father admitted, "which is why this is your choice." For the first time since my arrest, he wasn't guiding me. He was trusting me. I requested one thing, a recorded statement. Not testimony, not an interview, a message. Sarah found out within hours. She tried to block it, failed. She tried to discredit it, too late. She tried to reach me directly, denied. For the first time since this began, she had no access to me, and that terrified her. The morning of the board vote, the facility buzzed. Guards were tense, phones rang constantly, my name moved through the halls like a rumor with weight. At noon, they escorted me to a private room. Camera, chair, one take. No script. I looked straight into the lens. Not angry, not broken, present. "I trusted my wife," I began, "not because I was weak, but because partnership requires vulnerability." I spoke about the access, the documents, the timing. I didn't accuse. I explained. Then I said the one thing Sarah never expected. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want accountability." I paused. And accountability doesn't belong to courts alone. It belongs to truth. The video was sent to the board, simultaneously. No edits, no spin, just reality. The vote began. Sarah spoke first. Of course she did. She cried, she framed, she performed. She painted herself as the only thing standing between chaos and collapse. She spoke for 42 minutes. No one interrupted. Then the chair cleared his throat and pressed play. I wasn't in that room, but I know what happened because silence doesn't lie. The video ended. No applause, no arguments. Just one question from a board member who had backed Sarah since day one. "Why didn't you disclose the trust?" Sarah opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "That wasn't relevant," she said. Another board member spoke. "Why did you route communications through his accounts while he was in transit?" She stammered. A third question followed. "Why did you threaten him after the injunction?" That one did it, because threats aren't misunderstandings. their intent. The clause was enacted, unanimously. Sarah was removed immediately. Security escorted her out. No cameras, no speech, just the sound of heels stopping mid-hallway. Inside prison, I felt it before I heard it. That pressure in my chest, the one that had lived there since the verdict, lifted. Not gone, but lighter. My lawyer arrived smiling for the first time. She's finished, at least here. At least? I asked. She's being investigated separately, civil and criminal. She replied. I nodded. But I wasn't celebrating, because removal isn't resolution. That night, another letter arrived. Different handwriting, different fear. You think this is over. You don't know what you started. I read it twice, then tore it in half. Sarah had lost power, but she hadn't lost obsession. And obsession is more dangerous than authority. 2 days later, my appeal was approved. Temporary release, pending review. Not freedom, but movement. As I stepped out of the facility, blinking into daylight that felt unfamiliar, my father stood waiting. He didn't hug me. He nodded. Welcome back, he said. But even as the gates closed behind me, even as fresh air filled my lungs, I felt it. The story wasn't done, because Sarah hadn't played her last move yet, and the one she was preparing would force me to confront the one thing I had avoided since the beginning: what justice actually costs.
Freedom doesn't arrive all at once. It leaks in slowly, through unfamiliar air, through sounds you forgot existed, through the weight of choices returning to your body. When I stepped outside those gates, the sky looked too wide. My instincts were still calibrated for walls. Even walking felt like a negotiation. My father watched me adjust without comment. Home? He asked. Not yet, I said. He nodded. He already knew. Sarah disappeared from public view the same day I was released. No statements, no photos, no lawyers speaking on her behalf. People assumed she was hiding. They were wrong. Sarah had never hidden in her life. She was repositioning. The first sign came from my lawyer. She's not fighting the removal, she said during our first meeting outside. She's not appealing the clause. That's good, I replied cautiously. No, she corrected. That's strategic. I leaned back, meaning she's conceding the company, she said, so she can focus on you. That's when I finally understood the real game. The company was leverage. My reputation was the target. If she could destroy me permanently, socially, legally, psychologically, then losing the company wouldn't matter. She didn't want power anymore. She wanted erasure. Within days, whispers started again. Not about fraud, about me. Anonymous tips to journalists, old acquaintances suddenly remembering stories that never happened, subtle suggestions that my release was bought, not earned. Nothing concrete, just enough smoke to make people squint. My father wanted to counter immediately. Press conference, he said. Full exposure. No, I replied. He frowned. Silence lets lies breathe, and noise gives them oxygen, I said. He studied me carefully. You've changed, he said. Yes, I've learned how she thinks. Sarah wanted a reaction, public anger, public defense, public spectacle, because the moment I looked emotional, she could reframe everything as instability. I refused to give her that. Instead, we waited and watched. 3 weeks after my release, she made her move, not through media, through law, a civil suit, personal, not against the company, against me. Allegations of emotional abuse, coercion, psychological manipulation during our marriage. The timing was surgical. She wasn't trying to win the case. She was trying to keep me in court, because courtrooms don't just judge facts, they drain lives. My lawyer read the filing in silence. She's escalating, she said finally.
"She's desperate," I replied. "No," she quieted, "she's committed. Commitment changes the rules. People who are committed don't bluff. They burn bridges while standing on them." The hearing was scheduled fast, too fast. Sarah walked in confident, composed, dressed for sympathy. She didn't look at me. I looked at her. She flinched, just once. Her testimony was controlled, too controlled. She spoke about fear, about imbalance, about how powerful men don't need to raise their voices to dominate. The room leaned toward her. I felt it, that familiar tilt. When it was my turn, my lawyer stood and then sat back down. She looked at me. "It's time," she said. I took the stand, not to defend, to reveal. I spoke about trust, about access, about the documents. Then I said something no one expected. I protected her, I said, even after she destroyed me. The judge leaned forward. "I could have exposed everything," I continued, "years ago, quietly, permanently." Sarah's head snapped up. "But I didn't," I said, "because power without restraint becomes cruelty." Silence filled the room. Then I added the sentence that changed everything. "And because my father taught me that legacy matters more than victory." My father stood. For the first time, permission granted. He submitted one document, unsealed, a timeline, not of transactions, of conversations, dates, locations, witnesses, including the night Sarah had made that mysterious phone call, the one she thought no one knew about. The judge read slowly, then looked at Sarah. "Did you contact a private consultant to attempt an off-record transfer of your husband?" Sarah didn't answer. Her lawyer spoke. "Objection." The judge raised a hand. "Did you?" he repeated. Sarah's composure cracked. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough to show the truth underneath. The case was dismissed, with prejudice. But the damage? That was just beginning. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. I didn't speak. My father didn't either, but Sarah did. She walked straight into the microphones and said the one thing that sealed her fate. "If I can't have justice, no one should." That sentence echoed everywhere, online, on TV, in places she could never control again. Because it wasn't the voice of a victim, it was the voice of intent. Within days, investigations reopened, not on me, on her. Intimidation of witnesses, abuse of process, conspiracy. The same tool she used against me turned inward. I should have felt relief. I didn't, because as I stood on my balcony that night, city lights below, freedom still unfamiliar in my hands, I realized something terrifying. Sarah wasn't afraid of consequences. She was afraid of insignificance. And people like that don't stop when they lose. They stop when they break. My phone buzzed. One message. Unknown number. "You think you won. You just proved who you really are." I stared at it, then at the reflection in the glass. For the first time, I understood the final truth of this story. This wasn't about revenge or justice or even betrayal. It was about inheritance, not of money, of power. And the final battle wasn't in court. It was about who would define the ending. I didn't answer her right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I finally understood what she was really asking. Please wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about love. It wasn't even about mercy. It was about control. And for the first time, she had none. I let the call ring out. Then I turned my phone face down and sat there, watching the city breathe beneath me. Cars moved, lights flickered, lives continued, completely indifferent to the war that had consumed mine. That was the moment it ended. Not with a bang, not with revenge, but with clarity. The next morning, the final pieces fell into place.
The trust assumed public control of the holding companies quietly, cleanly, legally. No victory laps, no statements, just signatures activating mechanisms that had existed long before Sarah ever learned my middle name. The company she thought she stole was never really mine to lose. It had always been temporary stewardship. That truth hit the media like a delayed shockwave. Headlines shifted tone overnight. Not sympathy, not outrage, respect. Sarah's legal team withdrew, one by one. Officially, conflict of interest. Unofficially, they finally saw the whole board. Investigations accelerated, not with malice, but with inevitability, the kind that doesn't need pressure once the facts align. The same journalists who once praised her courage now asked sharper questions, questions she couldn't answer. She tried to disappear, but disappearance only works when no one is looking. Everyone was. Weeks later, she sent one final message. No threats, no framing, no manipulation, just the truth stripped bare by exhaustion. I didn't think you were that important. I thought I could replace you. I read it twice, then once more, and instead of anger, I felt something close to pity. Because here's the truth I learned the hard way. Betrayal doesn't come from hate. It comes from underestimation. She didn't betray me because she despised me. She betrayed me because she thought I was smaller than her ambition. I never responded. That was the last power she didn't anticipate. Months passed. The charges against me were formally dismissed, records corrected, quiet apologies issued by people who would never admit how close they came to being wrong forever. I returned to the company, not as a savior, not as a martyr, but as a custodian. I restructured, I delegated, I stepped back where ego once lived. Because prison teaches you something success never will. Nothing you own is worth your freedom, and nothing you build is worth losing yourself. My father and I spoke differently now, not as mentor and student, as equals. One night, over a simple dinner, he said something I'll never forget. You survived the test most heirs fail. I looked up. What test? He smiled faintly. Power taken from you. Sarah was sentenced quietly. No cameras, no spectacle, just a woman sitting alone in a courtroom, listening as consequences finally caught up with intention. I didn't attend. Closure doesn't require witnesses. I was reading comments on my YouTube videos the other day, and I realized I wasn't the only one. People wrote about partners who drained them, families who used them, friends who sold them out when the price was right. Different stories, same wound. So here's the truth I leave you with, not as a lesson, but as a warning wrapped in hope. Love doesn't betray you. People do. And power doesn't corrupt by itself. It reveals who was waiting for it. If you take nothing else from my story, take this. Never confuse access with loyalty. Never confuse intimacy with innocence. And never assume someone knows your worth just because they sleep beside you. Some people don't see value. They see opportunity. I lost my freedom. I lost my company temporarily. I lost years I'll never get back. But I gained something most people never do. Perspective. And the quiet confidence of knowing that when everything was stripped away, what remained was unbreakable. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about inheritance, not of wealth, but of restraint, of foresight, of knowing when to cite and when to let the truth do the damage for you. To anyone watching this who feels betrayed, cornered, or erased, you are not finished, you are not powerless, and you are not alone. Sometimes the fall is just the moment the world stops confusing who you were with who you're meant to become. The message didn't scare me. That's what scared me. You think you won. You just proved who you really are. People who are finished don't send messages like that. They disappear. They retreat. They collapse inward. Sarah was doing the opposite. She was sharpening. For the first time since this began, I felt exposed in a new way. Not legally, not financially, personally. Because when someone loses everything except obsession, they stop caring about consequences and start caring about impact. My lawyer urged caution. Change routines, she said. No predictable schedules, no solo appearances. My father was more direct. She's unstable, he said, and unstable people do irrational things. I looked at him. She's not irrational, I replied. She's intentional. That was the difference everyone else kept missing. 3 days passed. Nothing happened. No headlines, no filings, no leaks. The quiet pressed in like a held breath. Then, on the 4th day, my assistant called. "There's a problem," she said. "What kind?" I asked. "A legacy problem." The foundation. My father's foundation, the one I had quietly chaired for years, education grants, legal aid, scholarships, the part of our lives we never advertised. Someone had leaked documents, selective ones, framed ones, accusations of influence, of backdoor control, of bloodline privilege. The narrative was subtle but lethal. Power protecting power. Sarah hadn't gone after my future. She had gone after my past. I felt it then, the real threat. She wasn't trying to destroy me forward. She was trying to rewrite me backward. If she could poison the origin story, my father, the trust, the foundation, then everything I touched would be suspect, every win illegitimate, every recovery temporary. My father read the article once, then folded the paper carefully. "She's crossed a line," he said. I looked up. "Which one?" He met my eyes. "The one I don't forgive." That night he told me the full story. Not the version I grew up with, the real one. He had been the only son, too, raised under a man who believed love was a liability and secrecy was survival. My grandfather built his empire after watching partners destroy each other in public wars. He taught one rule above all others: never let your enemy know where the bloodline ends. The trust wasn't just financial, it was defensive. Layered ownership, silent partners, fail-safes that activated only when betrayal came from inside. People think wealth is money. It's not. It's insulation, my father said quietly. Sarah hadn't just attacked me. She had triggered a system older than her ambition. The next morning, she made her boldest move yet. She filed a restraining order against me, claiming intimidation, claiming fear, claiming my silence was a threat. The audacity was breathtaking, but the intent was clear. She wanted to force me into the open, to provoke a reaction she could frame. The hearing was set for 48 hours later, public, high profile, exactly what she wanted. My lawyer advised against attending. "She's baiting you," she said. "I know," I replied. "So don't take it." "I have to," I said. Everyone went quiet, because here's the truth no one else wanted to say out loud. If I didn't face her now, she would chase me forever. Not because she loved me, not because she hated me, but because I was the last thing she hadn't conquered. The courtroom was full. Media, observers, people who pretended this was about law, not spectacle. Sarah arrived early. She looked calm, too calm. When she saw me, she smiled, not warmly, possessively. Her lawyer spoke first, painted a picture of a powerful man using influence, legacy, and silence to terrify a woman who dared to speak out. It was effective. The room leaned again, that familiar tilt. Then the judge turned to me. "Do you deny these claims?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Do you wish to elaborate?" I stood, slowly, deliberately. "No," I said. A murmur rippled. Sarah frowned. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. My lawyer stood. "Your Honor," she said, "we'd like to submit Exhibit F." The judge nodded. "What is Exhibit F?" he asked. She looked directly at Sarah. "Her contingency plan." The screen turned on, an audio file, recorded weeks earlier. Sarah's voice filled the room, clear, unfiltered. "If I can't have justice, no one should have it." Gasps. Sarah stood abruptly. "That's illegal," her lawyer shouted. "That's fabricated." The judge raised a hand. "Sit down." Another clip played. "If I can't have justice, no one should have it." The same sentence, different context, same intent. Sarah's face drained of color. Not fear, rage. Pure, exposed rage. She turned toward me. "You think this makes you righteous. You're just like him." The judge slammed the gavel. "Order." But it was too late. She had broken character. The restraining order was denied immediately. But that wasn't the climax. That was the opening. As Sarah stormed out, her phone buzzed. She stopped mid-step, read the message, and for the first time since I had ever known her, she panicked. I didn't know it yet, but in that moment, everything she had built, every lie, every narrative, every shield, collapsed at once, because the final fail-safe had activated, the one she never knew existed, the one that answered to blood, not marriage. My father leaned in close as we left the courtroom. "It started," he said. "What has?" I asked. He didn't smile. "The inheritance phase." That night the news broke. Not about me, not about Sarah, about a quiet transfer of control across multiple international holdings, about a trust assuming authority, about an only son stepping into a role no one knew he had been prepared for since birth. Sarah called. Again. This time I answered. "Please," she said. Just one word, the most dangerous word in the world when spoken too late. I looked out at the city, at everything she tried to take, at everything she never understood, and I realized the final choice wasn't whether to destroy her, whether to end this cleanly, or let the truth finish what she started.